The kettle had already boiled twice by the time I finally sat down at the kitchen table. I do that sometimes, boil the water, get distracted by something small, a dish towel left on the counter, a cardinal at the feeder outside the window, and by the time I come back, it's gone cold. My husband used to say I was the only person he knew who could lose track of a kettle. That was his gentle way of saying I cared too much about everything else. He wasn't wrong. He passed 4 years ago, in February, during one of those gray weeks where the snow just sits on everything and the sky looks like an old bedsheet. Since then, it's been me and the house, the cardinal, and the kettle that goes cold. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a school board in Ontario. I raised 2 children in this house, my son and my daughter. I watched them learn to walk on these floors, do homework at this table, leave through that front door with backpacks too big for their bodies. I thought I knew what family meant. I really did. It started, the way most things start, with something that felt like love. My daughter and her husband had been talking about a trip to Nova Scotia for years. She'd mentioned it casually, the way you mention things you half want and half expect someone else to arrange. The East Coast, she'd say. Lunenburg. The Cabot Trail. Wouldn't it be beautiful? And then she'd move on to something else and I'd file it away. Last spring, I decided to make it happen. I don't spend frivolously, never have. After my husband died, I sat down with a financial advisor and figured out exactly what I had and what I could do with it. I have a modest RRSP, a small pension from the school board, and a savings account I'd been adding to for years. What I used to call the one-day account. One day we'll go somewhere. One day we'll do something just for us. One day came. I decided that one day would be a family trip. My plan was a 10-day stay in a rented house near Baddeck on Cape Breton Island, big enough for all of us, close to the Cabot Trail, with a dock and a rowboat, and enough space that nobody would feel crowded. I spent 3 weeks researching. I read every review. I checked the weather patterns for July. I emailed the property owner to ask about the kitchen appliances, because I wanted to make sure there was room to cook properly. I found a house with a wood-burning fireplace, a wrap-around porch, and a view of the Bras-d'Or Lake that made me hold my breath a little just looking at the photographs. I booked it for July 14th through the 23rd. 9 nights. I paid the full amount, just over $4,000. Through e-transfer to the owner, a retired teacher from Mabu who'd renovated the place herself. I also booked the ferry from North Sydney to Newfoundland as a day trip option, and I reserved a whale-watching tour for the second weekend, the kind my grandchildren would love. My grandchildren. That was the heart of it, really. My grandson is 7 and my granddaughter is 5, and they live 40 minutes away, which sounds close, and sometimes is, and sometimes isn't. I imagined my grandson asking me, years from now, "Do you remember Cape Breton, Grandma?" I imagined him holding my hand on the dock. I called my daughter in April to tell her. She was quiet for a moment after I explained. Then she said, "Oh, Mom, that sounds incredible." And then she said, "Let me talk to my husband." I should have noticed the pause. The pause was a full sentence by itself. But I didn't. I was too busy thinking about July. 3 days passed. Then my son-in-law texted me directly. Not my daughter, him. I want to be clear about something. My son-in-law and I have always been polite to each other. That's probably the most honest way I can describe it. Polite. He's a quiet man, keeps to himself, has opinions about things he doesn't always share until they matter to him. I had learned over the years to read around his edges, but we'd never had a real problem, or so I thought. The text said, "Hi, appreciate the thought, but we've decided we'd prefer to do the Nova Scotia trip as just our family unit. We think it'll be better for the kids to have that space. Hope you understand." I read it 3 times. I set my phone face down on the counter and washed 3 dishes that didn't need washing. Then I picked it up and read it again. Our family unit. I had paid $4,000 for a house I was no longer invited to stay in. I had booked a whale-watching tour for grandchildren. I was apparently not going to be sitting beside. I had imagined myself on a wrap-around porch, watching the lake, holding a cup of tea, and that image, which had been so clear to me, so certain, had just been quietly erased by a text message from my son-in-law. I didn't respond right away. I called my daughter instead. She answered on the second ring and immediately said, "Mom, I know," before I'd said a word, which told me everything. I asked her directly, "Did you agree to this?" She said, "We talked about it together." I said, "I paid for the house." She said, "I know, and we really appreciate that. But maybe you could join us for a few days instead of the whole time? Or we could do a different trip together, just the 2 of us, later in the summer." A few days. In a house I'd paid 9 nights for. I asked her what she thought I should do about the booking, since it was in my name on my credit card, paid with my money. She said, "Well, I guess we'd need you to transfer the reservation, or we can figure out the reimbursement later." Reimbursement, later. I told her I needed to think, and I got off the phone, and I sat at this kitchen table for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't just anger. Anger is too clean a word. It was something older and heavier. The feeling of realizing that you have been building towards something in your mind, something warm and real and full of people you love, and then discovering that the people you were building it for were not building toward the same thing. That you were always, in some part of the picture, optional. I thought about all the ways I had made myself useful. The Christmases I'd hosted, the dinners I'd driven 40 minutes for and 40 minutes home from. The times I'd taken the children for a week so my daughter and her husband could have a break. The money I'd lent them when they were first getting their footing. $1,500 when they needed first and last for their place in Guelph, which I never mentioned again and never asked to be repaid. The birthday gifts, the school supplies, the coat I bought my grandson last winter because I'd noticed his old one was getting small, and my daughter seemed stressed, and I thought, I'll just take care of it. You do these things because you love people, not because you're keeping a ledger. I know that. I've always known that. But there is a difference between giving freely and being taken for granted. And sitting at that table, I finally let myself see it. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the booking confirmation. The house was listed under my name. The payment had come from my account. Legally, the reservation was mine. The owner had been clear about the cancellation policy. Full refund if canceled 30 or more days before check-in, and we were 62 days out. I sat there for a long time, looking at the screen. Then I thought about my friend Ruth Ann. We've known each other since our children were small. We met at a parent council meeting in 1993 and have been talking almost every week since. She lost her husband 2 years before I lost mine, and she lives alone in Kingston. And she is one of the funniest, most clear-eyed people I have ever known. She has been telling me for years that I give too much and expect too little, and I have been telling her for years that she's too cynical. and we are probably both partly right. I also thought about my friend Wanda from my old book club. She moved to Halifax 5 years ago, after her retirement, and she has been sending me photos of the harbor ever since, saying I need to come visit. I never had. I'd always thought one day. I picked up the phone and called Ruthann first. I told her the whole story. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it out flat, the way it happened. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "You know what you have to do." I said I wasn't sure. She said, "Yes, you are." Then I called Wanda in Halifax. I told her I was thinking about coming to Nova Scotia in July. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and then she said, "Finally, Evelyn, finally." And then she stopped and said, "Wait, who's Evelyn?" And I said, "That's not my name." And we laughed for a long time, the way you laugh with someone you've known for 30 years. I went back to the laptop. I didn't cancel the reservation. I kept every night exactly as it was. July 14th through the 23rd, the house near Baddeck with the wraparound porch and the dock and the view of the Bras d'Or Lake. I kept the whale watching tour. I kept the day trip option to the ferry. What I changed was the guest list. Ruthann said yes before I finished explaining. Wanda would drive up from Halifax and join us for the last 4 nights. And my friend Georgette. I should tell you about Georgette. She's 71, teaches watercolor classes on Thursday mornings, has been widowed longer than any of us, and laughs with her whole body. She said, "I haven't been to Cape Breton since 1987. I'm in." Then I texted my son-in-law back. I wrote, "Thank you for letting me know. I've made other arrangements for the house. The reservation will remain in my name. I hope your summer is restful." He responded within 4 minutes. "Wait, what does that mean? What other arrangements?" I didn't answer. My daughter called 40 minutes later. Her voice had a different quality this time, not the careful, managed tone of the first call. Something rawer. She said, "Mom, the booking, we were counting on using the house." I said, "I know. But you told me it was going to be just your family unit. So I made plans for just my family." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "Sweetheart, I paid for that house. I planned that trip. I was told I wasn't welcome. I don't know what fairness you're referring to, but I think I'm actually being quite reasonable." She was quiet. Then she said, "What about the kids?" They were excited. I said, "Then perhaps their father should book them something." I want to be clear. That was not easy to say. I love my grandchildren in a way that makes the rest of life feel sharper and more worthwhile. The thought of them being disappointed pinched somewhere real inside me. But I also understood, sitting at that table, that I had spent decades smoothing things over to protect everyone from small discomforts, and the only person who had never been protected from anything was me. There were 2 more calls over the next few days. My son-in-law to ask about the deposit structure and whether I would at least forward the property owner's contact. I said I'd think about it. My daughter, softer this time, asking if we could talk in person. I said yes, but not yet. I needed July 1st. We drove up on a Thursday. Ruthann and I took turns at the wheel, which we've done on road trips since our 40s, and we stopped at a Tim Hortons outside Truro because we always do, and we talked about everything and nothing for 11 hours. And it felt like breathing after a long time of not quite getting enough air. The house was exactly what the photographs had promised. The porch wrapped around 3 sides. The lake was silver in the evening light. Georgette walked out onto the dock and stood there for a long time without saying anything, and then she turned around and said, This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. We cooked together every night. Real cooking, not reheated, not ordered in. Georgette made a fish chowder on the second night that I am still thinking about. Ruth Ann baked blueberry scones on the morning of the fourth day, and we ate them on the porch, watching the mist burn off the water. Wanda arrived on day 5 with 2 bottles of Nova Scotia wine and a story about getting briefly lost in Antigonish that kept us laughing through dinner. We did the whale-watching tour. I stood at the rail of the boat, the wind doing what wind does to hair of a certain age, and I watched a humpback surface about 40 meters away, so close I could hear it, and I thought, I almost missed this. I almost gave this away. We drove the Cabot Trail on day 7. We stopped at every lookout. Georgette sketched in her small notebook. Ruth Ann narrated the whole drive like a nature documentary, which is a gift she has always had. I took more photographs than I'd taken in years. On the last morning, I sat on the dock with my coffee while the others were still asleep. The lake was perfectly still. A great blue heron landed on a rock near the shore and stood there like it had nowhere better to be. I thought about what I would say to my daughter when I got home. I had been turning it over for days, the way you work at a knot, not yanking, just finding where it's actually caught. I thought about what I wanted her to understand, not as a reproach, but as something true. That I am a person, not a resource. That my time and my money and my planning are expressions of love, and love is not a transaction, but it does require being seen. That the years I have left, and I am not morbid about this, just honest, are mine. That I intend to spend them among people who are glad I'm in the room. When I got home, I called her. She cried a little. I let her. Then she said she was sorry, that she should have pushed back, that she had let him make that call and had told herself it was easier. I said, I know. And I said, but easier for whom? We didn't fix everything that afternoon. That's not how families work, not the real ones. But we were honest with each other in a way we hadn't been in a while. And that felt like something worth building on. My son-in-law and I have not spoken about it directly. That will come, or it won't. But I'm not going to arrange my life around a conversation he may never be ready to have. What I know is this. I came home with a heron photograph I've had printed and framed. I came home with the smell of salt air still somehow on my jacket. I came home having watched a humpback whale breach the surface of the Atlantic Ocean from 10 feet away, with 3 women who love me standing at my side. The kettle is on, and for the first time in a long time, I'm not going to let it go cold.